So when the 8 scale project started, this was something that was kind of a long time coming. This was something that Junior and Yuka they were kind of the, brainchilds of that.
Probably 2004 to 2005, somewhere in that area. Losi Jr. And Yuka Tsunari were working on going and racing 8 scale around Europe to develop a new 8 scale buggy.
I was doing 8 scale racing at the time, but for jamming, and was traveling to all the races, again, racing gas truck, but I was also racing 8 scale. So I had a pretty good hand on the pulse of 8 scale and what was going on. And so between Junior, Yuka, and myself, that's where kind of the 8 platform, I guess, came from. But I think what was unique for me was, like, I was still young at the time, but the kind of, I guess, roles had changed a little bit as far as like experience goes, because Junior and Yuka had far, far more experience than me. They had been racing longer than me, more educated than me, but the time and the work that I had put in, going to the track racing gas truck, going to the track racing 8 scale, there was a lot of like key things that I feel I was able to kind of open their eyes to, where I remember one thing specifically, like the original 8 was going to come with a really, really wide rear diff with shorter dog bones. And we had been doing all this testing and kind of just hammering out laps. We then went and tested this wide diff, and it was like magical. Like, it went through the bumps better. It was like, we're like, holy cow, we're onto something. This is something no one else has done. It's going to be innovative. It's really cool, and lap times were better. And we kind of went home that night, and like I sat down with Junior the next day, and I was like, we need to go back and we need to retest the rear diffs. And he's like, why? It was, everything about it was so impressive. And I said, yeah, but we took a diff out that we had been running and running and running, and the outdrives were worn, the drive shafts were worn. Like, then we put in a fresh diff, new outdrives, new drive shafts. You don't have the mechanical bind. It goes through the bumps better. I said, maybe I'm wrong, but we need to at least test it before we commit to it, because people are going to question it because it's so radically different. And we went back and tested with new diffs and spent a lot more time with that, and we ended up with the narrow diff. So there was things where, as a group, as a team, we were able to kind of put all of our heads together and all of our experience together to pretty much change 8 scale. I mean, at the time, the 8 was so radically different, so innovative in comparison to any of the other cars on the market, that I would say it totally changed the focus of all companies with 8 scale moving forward, because it was so different.
The biggest thing was the narrow weight, the roll centers that we had in that car. I mean, that car would turn on a dime. It would square up hard, accelerate like no other car. To your point of it having that, futuristic design, I think just caught everybody off guard. Everybody else was just fine with just producing the status quo, where the thing I always liked about Team Losi was like, hey, we're going to do it differently. We're going to try to do it better. We released the original 8 Truggy. It had your traditional fit a Lexan polycarbonate body over the shock towers and have the wing stick out the back. We had a designer by the name of Dan Hissam, Dino Dan, we all know him as, and he was, I think we were at Hooters one night having a few beers, or maybe at lunch, not having beers. Anyways, he started sketching out literally on a napkin. I mean, how many times we've heard that story, an idea came from a napkin. And he's like, Hodge, here's what I think what the Truggy body should look like. And I looked at it and I was just like, ugh, I don't know, Dan, it's just a total departure, So we ended up sharing it with other team members here. Some people were like, yeah, I love it. Other people were like, I really don't like it. But then we end up making that body, and it ended up kind of transforming the whole Truggy class to give the Truggies that look of today, with that cab forward look. And really, I think it also led to cab forwards on 10 scale cars too. So it was just that one idea with the Truggy body, get the engine head out of the bed of the body, cab forward, little snub nose, that really just set the trend for the past, 10 years.
We were talking about what should we make? What future projects should we talk about? And I said, how about a fifth scale trophy truck? How about that? No one's done a 4-wheel drive fifth scale trophy truck. And we all thought it was a good idea. And next thing you know, hey, Rich, you're gonna run the fifth scale project. Oh man, I don't know anything about gas, but I was thrown into the project there. So I worked with our designer, Brent, back in the day. We actually went through 2 iterations of the 5T. The first one was a true, like a Baja Ray. Actually looked like a Baja Ray. It was a solid axle rear end, independent front suspension. The idea was to get it looking like a full-on trophy truck. And again, because I was such a scale guy, I wanted it to look as real as possible. So we designed that thing, but we immediately started realizing, how in the heck are we going to keep a rear axle in that thing barrel rolling at 40 miles an hour? It's probably not going to work. And our 8 platform was doing really, really well. So that's when we decided, hey, let's do a big 8 is basically what it came out to. Once we got to a point of getting all the sample parts and I actually had a vehicle, I actually asked to be taken off the project and handed over to Gary. Gary Kai's raced quarter scale. He knew gas motors, he knew 2-stroke motors, and I just knew that I didn't know that. I didn't know how to set up a clutch. I didn't know how to tune these motors and where we're gonna get, and it just didn't make sense for me to continue on with it. I did do the stylizing of it. I did get the tires and the scale look of the stuff. I got all that point to that part, but I just knew the reality is I'm not a gas guy, and Gary is. So let's have Gary finish up the project and go from there.
We had a very successful 8-scale platform at that time. And it's like, if you have something that works, I'm not saying you just copy it, but you pick up those facets of that project or that product, and you put it to work in, larger scale, which is basically what we did. We identified the fact that the HPI buggy, 2-wheel drive buggy, was extremely hard to work on. It wasn't extremely durable when they started putting tune pipes and whatnot on it. It had some product issues, some parts issues and whatnot. And so basically what we did is we said, okay, fresh sheet of paper, how do we make a better Baja? And that list grew from, well, okay, it has to be durable and has to be easy to work on. 2 pretty big facets, right? Well, then we said, well, but it's got to do this and this and this and this and this, and it's got to be easier to drive, because these things, they were really handfuls to drive. You could go bombing pretty straight, but then it would flip and break and whatnot. So it's like, we said, okay, well, we know how to do 4-wheel drive, and that's basically what we did, is we made it modular, so it was easy to work on. It had a front end, a rear end, and a center section. We made the engine real easy to put in and take out. I remember one of the problems that we encountered initially was that having a truck that heavy, when it would flip and roll or whatever, that the engine, no matter how tight or how much Loctite you use, the engine would shift just enough that you'd lose your gear mesh. So the fellow that did all of the engineering with me on this, Brett Redlin, I said, well, we need to take and put little marks on the chassis so you can know where to preset it. He goes, I got a better idea. He says, we're going to take these out and we'll make slugs that fit this oval that was the adjustment range, right? And when you put those slugs in, can't move. What a great idea, right? Brett was full of, I'm sure he still is, Brent's still full of those little neat ideas. remember the first time we went out, they had a big race at Milestone Park, which was a motorcycle park that had a fifth scale track. And I had asked permission if I could come out and run. They said, sure. Because fifth scale, you gotta remember, fifth scale was as much social then, and it still is to a great extent, as it is competition. So guys would show up and they'd have these cars, these Bajas, with aluminum wheels and chrome this and anodized that and dual wheels, and it was like, you know, a place to come out was like a car show almost, but they also raced, okay? And I went out and I was running with them, and I was just running stock engine, stock tires, because that's all we had at those times. And it was like, this is fun. I was just passing cars left and right, and, you know, and the clutch, I think, the clutch spring broke, and so I, you know, brought it in and took it over. Of course, everybody came over and was watching, right, because they wanted to look at it, and they'd heard about it, but they hadn't really, I guess, seen it. And you know, I took out 4 screws, right, took the engine out, 4 more screws, took out the clutch, replaced it, 4 screws, put the slugs back in there, and how do you set the gear mesh? Well, you set them with these little cam things in here, right? Really? Within 10 minutes, started it up and went back out on the track, right? And I didn't realize at that point, because I heard this come back so many times, is that they were amazed. He said, if somebody broke a clutch in their Baja, they go home. It's like an hour, 2 hours, right? And it's like, well, I guess then we hit that mark.
The durability factor with that car is just absolutely amazing. Yeah, this weekend when we launched it at the Min 400, right, somebody said that thing was 30 feet in the air, and, you know, it came down and didn't break, you know, and I mean, it was just pretty amazing. You know, I think one guy actually came over and bought one after, you know, just like couldn't believe that thing took that abuse. And it just comes back to, you know, how Team Losi Racing and Losi are intertwined. You know, a lot of those materials that we use on the 8 went into the 5T. So that's how the racing supports the RTR side of it. You know, when you look at, you know, a suspension arm looks like a suspension arm, but you don't understand the engineering that was developed from the race side that comes down into the RTR side. Much like we see in full-scale racing, you know, a full-scale race car, some of the technology does come down into the engines and the tire development, part development, same thing in RC. And that's why I think that, you know, some of our products are just so durable, is because of the racing heritage and design.